The Ashvale Mountains had swallowed armies whole. Elven scouting parties. Dwarven expeditions armed to the teeth. Even a guild of battle mages who had collectively leveled a coastal city had marched into those smoldering peaks and never returned. The mountains were the domain of the Dragon Clutch, 16 ancient WYRMS led by Queen Seraphix, whose wingspan could blot out the sun and whose roar could shatter granite cliffs like glass. The kingdom of Valdros had passed a law. Simple. Unambiguous. No living soul shall enter the Ashvale Mountains, on penalty of death, a death the crown will not be required to administer, as the dragons shall handle it themselves. And yet. On a Tuesday morning, Ethan Cross drove his beat-up Ranger truck up the mountain trail, a portable grill bungee corded to the truck bed, and a cooler packed with 20 pounds of marinated brisket, 6 racks of baby back ribs, a whole chicken, and approximately enough sausages to feed a small platoon. He was not a warrior. He was not a wizard. He was a 34-year-old man from a dead-end town called Millhaven who had somehow been yanked through a dimensional rift 6 months ago and had been surviving by doing what he did best, cooking meat over fire and selling it to people. He hadn't planned to enter the mountains. His truck had simply broken down at the trail's base, and while waiting for whatever passed for roadside assistance in this dimension, he decided there was absolutely no reason to let good brisket go to waste. He set up his grill. He lit the charcoal. He got the smoke going. 3,000 feet above him, Queen Seraphix was in the middle of dissolving a trespassing mercenary platoon when something stopped her cold. She hovered mid-breath, fire curling at the back of her throat, and tilted her enormous scaled head. What is that? Something was rising from the base of her mountain. Not smoke from a campfire, she knew the bitter, panicked smell of that. Not the acrid stench of alchemical torches. This was something else entirely. Something that bypassed thought and struck directly at a deeply buried, shamefully animal part of her brain. It smelled like rendered fat kissed by hardwood smoke. Like caramelized spice crusts and low-heat patience. Like something had died beautifully and been transformed into something magnificent. The mercenaries fled while she was distracted. She did not notice. Draken, she called telepathically to her second. Do you smell that? Yes, came the bewildered response from her second-in-command, a 400-year-old red dragon who had once burned a naval fleet to ash. I've been smelling it for 10 minutes. I was going to pretend I wasn't. Where is it coming from? A pause. The base trail. There appears to be a human. With a metal box. On fire. He's burning himself? No, matriarch. He appears to be burning meat. In a very specific and intentional way. Seraphix landed on a ridge 200 feet from Ethan Cross with the subtlety of a collapsing cathedral. The ground shook. Trees cracked. Loose stones cascaded down the mountain face. Ethan looked up from his grill, took one calm look at 16 tons of ancient dragon, and said, "You want some? I've got plenty." Seraphix stared at him. In 400 years on this mountain, no trespasser had ever said that. "You are not afraid," she said. Her voice was designed by evolution to induce panic. It rumbled the earth beneath his boots. "I've been afraid," Ethan said, lifting the grill lid and checking the brisket with the focused attention of a surgeon. "Doesn't really help the cooking. You want a rib or not? Fair warning, I'm about 30 minutes out from the brisket but the ribs are done." She should have killed him. She had the fire literally ready. But her nostrils were doing something her pride found deeply undignified. They were chasing the smoke, seeking it out, pulling it in like a dragon 3 centuries younger who hadn't learned restraint yet. "What is that scent?" she finally asked. "Baby back ribs," Ethan said. "Brown sugar, smoked paprika, garlic, a little cayenne. Oak and cherry wood chips for the smoke. Low and slow, that's the secret. 220 degrees for 4 hours." He glanced up at her again with the cheerful practicality of a man who had made his peace with most outcomes. I'm Ethan, by the way. Ethan Cross. I am Queen Seraphix, she said, with a dignity that felt increasingly difficult to maintain given that she was now sitting down like a dog who'd spotted someone opening a treat bag. Matriarch of the Ashvale Clutch. I have ruled these mountains since before your kingdom's founding language existed. Nice to meet you, Ethan said. Pull up a boulder. She ate 6 racks of ribs. The entire clutch descended within an hour. Ethan had not planned for 16 dragons, but he adapted, which was, he reflected, the defining human superpower. He had them forming a rough queue by wing color. He had Draken, who turned out to be deeply anxious about waiting, doing crowd management with his tail. He was rationing the brisket like a field surgeon with limited plasma. This is unprecedented, Seraphix said between ribs. She had become unself-conscious about it disturbingly fast. No human has survived entry to these mountains in recorded history. I didn't really enter, Ethan pointed out. My truck broke down. And yet you set up your cooking apparatus rather than running. Running didn't seem useful. He was mopping a rack with sauce now, the smell of it producing an actual rumble from Draken that was clearly involuntary. Where would I run to? You're faster than me. You breathe fire. You can fly. Running's just dying while moving. Seraphix considered this. Most beings run anyway. Most beings haven't spent 20 years in competition barbecue, Ethan said. You develop a certain perspective on what matters and what doesn't. He sliced into the brisket to check the smoke ring and made a noise of deep personal satisfaction. There we go. That's the one. She watched him work with the focused attention she usually reserved for prey. But this was different, he wasn't prey. He was something she genuinely did not have a category for. He was unhurried in the presence of things that ended civilizations. He seemed to find the entire situation interesting rather than terrifying. He had looked at 16 ancient dragons descending on him and thought, I should probably portion this out carefully. What do you want? She asked him finally. Ethan looked up. What? Every creature that has ever approached this mountain has wanted something. Territory. The treasury in the deep caves. Dragon scales for their armor. What do you want, Ethan Cross? He thought about it genuinely, in the unhurried way he seemed to approach everything. Parts for my truck would be great, he said. And honestly? I've been looking for a reliable spot to set up a proper pit. Somewhere with good airflow, quality hardwood, and neighbors who won't call the fire department. He looked around at the mountains. At the permanent volcanic venting that lined the ridge. At the ancient hardwood forests on the lower slopes. This seems like good real estate. There was a long silence. You want to cook, Seraphix said slowly, on my mountain. I want to cook for your mountain, Ethan said. There's a difference. He held out a slice of brisket on the flat of his knife toward her. Try it first. We can negotiate after. She ate it directly off the blade. The smoke ring was perfect, a deep red ring of absolute patience and craft. The fat had rendered completely. The bark was dark and slightly sweet, and something in the back of her ancient reptilian brain simply stopped calculating threat levels, stopped running territorial defense protocols, stopped doing everything except experiencing that singular moment. She sat with it for a full 30 seconds. I have eaten knights in full armor, she said finally. Entire horses. A sea creature the size of this mountain. Nothing has ever. She searched for the word with the expression of someone being humbled against their will. Nothing has ever tasted deliberate before. Ethan nodded, satisfied. That's what low and slow does. You may stay, said Queen Seraphix, matriarch of the Ashvale Clutch, ruler of the unconquered peaks, terror of the eastern kingdoms, in a voice that was slightly too soft for her usual register. We will discuss terms. Works for me, Ethan said, and went back to his grill. 3 months later, the Kingdom of Valdros received a formal diplomatic message from the Ashvale Clutch, the first in recorded history, requesting an import license for brown sugar, smoked paprika, and cherry wood chips. The Crown spent 6 weeks trying to figure out what had happened. Ethan Cross was not particularly helpful in explaining it. "I just made ribs," he told the royal ambassador. The ambassador had no framework for this and filed the most confused report in Valdrosian diplomatic history.